And anyone that has any experience with electromagnetism will tell right away that is a huge electromagnetic phenomenon. Okay? It was designed to be discovered. If you take the size of the sun, the size of the moon, the distance from the moon from the earth, and the distance of the sun, you discover that these dimensions have to be an exact number in order to see the corona. It turns out that these two distances and these rays have to be in a precise relationship. If it isn't, the moon will be too big to blot out the whole thing, or if it's too small, you'll be blinded by the rest of it. It's exactly the size and relationship when the moon goes in front of that sun on a total eclipse, you can see the corona. And because you can see the corona, you discover spectroscopy. And out of spectroscopy, the whole universe starts to open up. And you begin to realize this was not only designed, it was not only designed for life on the planet Earth, it was designed to be discovered. And what a breathtaking thing that is to encounter. If you take a temperature profile of the sun, it's really quite surprising. Because the photosphere, the chromosphere, the corona is at a higher temperature than the rest of it. That's a surprise. Well, I thought the sun was just some kind of nuclear explosion. That's a guess. That's way out of whack. The sun, you're going to discover, is a very sophisticated light bulb. It's an electromagnetic phenomenon. This is the temperature profile. If you take a voltage profile, it's somewhat the inverse of that. And as Bob Schober points out to me, this is simply identical to a solid-state PNP transistor. Boy, is there a clue there. Is that the way the sun is getting its energy as it passes through the fields of the universe? I'm expecting Bob to put his hat on and figure out a way, can we get a way to tap that energy for the Swansat satellite system? That would be an exciting possibility. But there are electric currents in the sun. And here's a map of them. If you have a main current flowing in at both top and bottom, and they flow out at the perimeter, it creates secondary currents in each side, and those are now beginning to be understood. And if the main magnetic field starts to weaken intensity, a secondary surface current will reverse direction, and the magnetic polarity of the loops will also reverse. It does not depend upon the direction of the primary current. It's a question of strengthening or weakening. And these reversals appear to occur about every 11 years. And they have profound effects on what goes on the Earth, by the way. And so, if you have what we call a solar prominence, from a strong looping current will produce secondary magnetic field. It will surround and try to expand the loop. If the current becomes too strong, the double layer that contains it will be punctured. And if the voltage gradient becomes strong enough, the discharge path will break, the energy stored in the primary magnetic field will be explosively released into space, and you have what's called a prominence. That's piercing the double layer that produces what we call here a solar flare. How many have heard or seen solar flares? There's the electric diagram that explains them. Okay? Now here's a picture of the sun. There's the plasma field pictures of them. You can, by the very curvature, you can sense their magnetic properties here. Now, here is a very prominent solar flare. Let me show you the size of that. Let me put the Earth synthetically. It wouldn't get this close, but if the Earth was here, that's where the Earth would be. That's a big flare. That's the relative size of the Earth on that flare. Now, I'd like to show you, I'm hoping this will work now. This is a film strip that will show you these flares, and you see them in motion. It doesn't take any imagination to realize what you're watching there is magnetic phenomenon, following the lines of force of these magnetic fields. These are incredibly descriptive, and that's not gravity at work, that's electromagnetism at work. Those are Birkeland currents that you're watching, okay? Well, anyway, we'll move on here. Look at a leaf. You discover that it's been designed to take those frequencies from the sun and produce a lot of different things. You have a thing called photosynthesis, which is being built with light. These are sugar factories with millions of new glucose molecules per second. Most plants produce more glucose than they use and store it as starch and other carbohydrates in root stems and leaves. Each year, photosynthesis organisms produce about 170 billion metric tons of extra carbohydrates, about 30 metric tons for every person on the earth. So we have an amazing dependency, not only in the design of the universe and the design of the sun, but how the plants produce the oxygen and the sugar to feed the animals, and how the animals produce the CO2, which causes the whole thing to work. And we find the interconnection here is so complex, I couldn't take better part of an hour just to explain the different steps in the photosynthetic process. But the elegance of design, the more you study it, staggers you to realize the degrees to which God went to provide the environment that we enjoy every day. Genesis chapter 1, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament which divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. There are two words that are translated here by the 1611 translators that need a little more reach. Rakia actually means an extended surface, expanse. It's labeled firmament in our English translation. It's an expanse, meaning it is a flat as a base or support. The Hebrew word signifies like a sheet spread or a curtain drawn out, is the thought. The other word there, that's mayim, which is translated waters, recognize that it's a term as close as they could get to suggesting fluids. Transitory things, fluids. And I'm going to suggest plasmas. That term was invented when we discovered what plasmas were. It also can mean danger or violence. It implies motion, if you will. So let me take a liberty here and use modern terms and translate those things. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the plasmas, and let it divide the plasmas from the plasmas. And God made the expanse and divided the plasmas which were under the expanse from the plasmas which were above the expanse, and it was so. So I suggest that as a possibility. God challenges Job. He says, can thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? These are constellations that are tied together, not by gravity, by electromagnetism. The seven sisters, the Pleiades, are a group of stars, but they're physically, they look like they're together. They're actually quite distant between them. What's binding them together is the equations of James Clerk Maxwell, not the equations of Sir Isaac Newton. The boundaries of reality. We've gone a quick glimpse here, talk about size to the right. We've talked a little bit about the macrocosm, that it's finite, and that's led to all kinds of conjectures that need to be repaired in both astronomy and astrophysics. On the small side, the microcosm, we've talked about the indivisible units, the quantum physics and subatomic particles. There is a concept that ties this all together. Because if we take a look at the metacosm, we know that we're in a digital simulation. We talked about that. Our universe is but a shadow of a larger reality, praise God. But what ties us together in the microcosm, we've been talking about the zero-point energy, right? And what ties that together to the macrocosm are the plasmas. And so we really close the loop, if you will, if you follow me here. I encourage you to get a book by Donald E. Scott. It's an excellent tutoring device because he's an outstanding communicator, and he makes this whole subject very direct and illuminating without talking down to you. The Electric Sky, a challenge to the myths of modern. Much of what I've drawn here is drawn from his book. It's readily available. A more technical term, maybe more greater historic interest, is Pratt's Physics of the Plasma Universe. But if you Google any of these guys on the internet, you will get a plethora of resources and references that will take you through this. Now, we put what you've experienced here this evening is the boundaries of what we call the Boundaries of Reality series. We did a thing called Beyond Time and Space many years ago, talking about the impact of Einstein's theory of relativity and the nature of time and the nature of space and hyperspaces. We've just republished that, freshened it up, and put it out as a DVD for those that are interested. Another one that we started 14 years ago, Beyond Coincidence, the evidence of deliberate design, the anthropic principle as it's called, the hidden messages that are in plain sight, And how sure can we really be that the Bible is the Bible? And we deal with that head on in a thing called Beyond Coincidence. And then the third one in the trilogy was Beyond Perception, which is basically the nature of matter, the subatomic world, the holographic universe, and the dimensions beyond our own. And we call that Beyond Perception. This was our famous trilogy that we've just republished and freshened up and brought up to date, but we've added a fourth to the trilogy. So I guess I have to call it a quartet now. And the fourth one that we've reviewed, perhaps superficially tonight, I call it Beyond Newton, challenging the myths of astronomy, the Burnham celestial model, the plasma universe, and so forth. And we've also packaged these all four into a package for those that want to do that for what it's worth. So I encourage you to explore that. So I think I'm out of gas. I do want to highlight something that you need to know. How many of you are saved? Can I see your hands? Praise God, that's step one. That's more important than anything else. That job was done 100% at Golgotha by our coming King. But many people are not aware that there's a second step. Do you know that the disciples that were called, they were saved, but they were called? How many of you don't have to show, well, how many feel that you're called to be a disciple? Okay, see, there are not quite as many hands. Okay, I understand that. That's candor. See, the first thing is to discover your salvation. It's available in Jesus Christ by just trusting him. Praise God, he did it all. You can't add to what he did. That would be blasphemous. But there's another step that you want to be sensitive to. Did God save you? Why? Why? There are many stories in this room. Some of them very dramatic, some maybe quite straightforward. But every one of us in this room that can raise their hand about being saved are the result of a miracle. I believe that miracle is the result of someone's prayer. The question is, why were you saved? There's a collective reason to glorify God, of course. I'm going to suggest the possibility of a specific reason. God saved you for a specific calling. And let me tell you candidly, I've been married for 53 years. I've been a Christian for, 65, I guess. I've had a life of incredible adventures, and I won't bore you with that panorama, except to make this point. In a life of incredible adventures, the most exciting one is right now. To discover your calling. The most exciting thing you'll do in your life is to discover what God called you to do and then to trust him in pursuing that calling. Now, I wouldn't presume to even guess what your calling might be. But I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. If you choose to join us, our institute will covenant to help you find, to achieve that calling, however you define it. When you get to the point in your walk that you believe you know what God has called you to do, we will help you prepare for that calling. And you can do it on the internet. You don't have to be face-to-face, although it helps. So I want you to be aware of the fact there is a think tank that you can be part of. It's called the Koine Institute. We've spent the last 6-7 years putting it together. We now have members in 70 countries.